This is What's Left America. I'm Chris Tritico. This is our first show, first podcast. What's Left America is produced by Left Out Media and the generosity of our sponsors and friends of the show like Poppy Massey, and we hope someday generosity of you. I'm joined today, and as always, we'll be joined by our good friends and my co-hosts, Chris Bell, Andy Georgeson, and James Campbell. And we're going to introduce each other right now. I'm proud to be on the show with my good friend Chris Bell, former congressman. You served one term in Congress, and one of the things that I was so proud of while you were in Congress, and you got districted out, which is why you're not in Congress anymore, but you filed an ethics complaint against, what was that guy's name?
Tom DeLay.
Tom DeLay. You filed an ethics complaint against Tom DeLay, and that started a snowball against this guy who was running roughshod over the country and started this redistricting movement to get a Republican majority in Congress that we're still dealing with today. But since then, you've been practicing law, and you've been an active Democrat and run for office here in Texas for several offices. But proud to have you on the show with us.
Well, thanks, Chris. It's good to be with you, and I'm very pleased by our other panelists. I think this is going to be a great podcast because one thing you notice, or I've noticed in listening to some podcasts, it really has become sort of the right-wing radio for the left. There are a lot of progressives who are listening to podcasts and getting information from podcasts. But one thing I find fairly disappointing is that you don't hear a great deal of diversity in a lot of the podcasts that are discussing politics and government and law in this day and age. And one of our fellow panelists is my very good friend, James Campbell. We have known each other for longer than either of us can remember. We originally met when we were both reporters back in the day. I was a radio reporter covering the courthouse, and James, I guess, was originally with the Houston Post and then with the Houston Chronicle, covering everything, the police and City Hall and a lot of topics along the way. And I think that James is probably one of the smartest and most level-headed folks that I've ever met. People will always go to James when they want sort of an even-handed opinion. He was the first African-American member of the Houston Chronicle editorial board at a time when I think it's rather safe to say now that the Houston Chronicle was really a good old boy network. And so you can imagine the kind of temperament and personality that he had to have in order to tear down that barrier. But he did, and he went from journalism into public relations, and he's really not just in public relations. I say James is really sort of like Mr. Wolf in Pulp Fiction. He's a fixer, and he takes care of things, and people go to him, and it may be public relations, but also might be government relations, or it might be a different kind of mess. But when I've seen James the most upset was following the 2016 election. He usually doesn't get too worked up about those types of things, but he was in disbelief, like a lot of us, that Donald Trump had been elected president. And I think, James, you, like many people in the United States of America, were looking for a way to vent a little bit, perhaps.
I was, Chris. In fact, I was sending text messages the entire night, basically to friends saying, "We're doomed." And you probably got one of those. And you probably, I know I sent one to my good friend, Andrea Georgeson. I consider her my little sister. I've been knowing her for over 20 years. She started when she was 5 years old. She was a prodigy on the Chronicle's editorial board. But Andrea used to always say to me that biracial kids are going to save America. And I think she was just about right about that, because we had a president who was biracial, who essentially brought America back from the Bush years. And I'm so happy that she agreed to participate in this podcast, because she brings a real perspective about not only diversity of issues, but more particularly women's issues, which she cares a great deal about. But more importantly, she cares about justice and for all people. And she has a perspective that I think you miss in a lot of podcasts, Chris, in terms of, she's a mom, she's a wife, she's a pretty good tennis player, she's an incredible competitor. When I played her,
she beats you, doesn't she?
Well, she got lucky one time. She and Jonas beat my girlfriend and I. But I'm really proud that we are again working together. She is now serving as the Sunday Outlook editor for the Houston Chronicle. For many years, she served as an editorial writer there and wrote some really good pieces, and one she chastised me on that I'll never forget when I wrote one about
transracial adoption.
Yeah.
Is that it?
You remember that?
Yes.
You'll never let me forget that, right? And I basically made the case that people who were not black should not be adopting black kids and blah, blah, blah. And Andrea was like, who wrote that? Because those editorials are anonymous. And she was like, who wrote that? And I wanted to go,
which one of you racists wrote that?
me? So
Did you just assume it was one of the good old boys?
I don't remember as well as James, but we had some good discussions about it.
Yeah. But anyway,
that's a nice way to put it.
I want to just say that, I'm glad that she agreed to participate in this, the two Chris's. And I really like that we're doing this because there's a perspective out there that people, particularly in Texas, that's just one train of thought because we're such a red thought state. But there's a diversity of thought in Texas, particularly on the progressive side. And so, Andrea, with that, I will let you have
Thank you, James. I feel the same about you. I just love you to death. And you, Chris Bell. But the person I want to introduce is my good friend, Chris Tritico. I love it when everyone says, we're going to just do a really short introduction of each other, and I prepare a really short introduction of the person I'm supposed to introduce, but I go last after
10 minutes.
Yeah, 2 10-minute introductions. So I'm going to follow directions and introduce Chris by saying that he has his entire career been a defense attorney at the state and federal level. He came to many people international attention when he represented Timothy McVeigh in the Oklahoma City bombing case. He's got a resume that's about 4 pages long, which he sent to me so that I could do this introduction.
And he's insisted that we put that whole thing up on our website.
We're going to put it up on the website, and you can access it.
Why aren't you reading it?
At your leisure. But it's important to say that Chris has currently represents 9,000 teachers in the teachers union, public school teachers, and he began his career as an associate of Racehorse Haynes, who we all remember, and is going to be our host.
Well, we're going to try. Let's see how this goes. Thank you, Andy. And this is going to be a fun show, fun pod. Can we call it a pod or a show? Can we?
We're a show.
Is it a show?
Call it a pod. It can be a cast. It can be a podcast.
Well,
it can be a hat. It can be a pen. It can be a broke.
But right now we're just podcasting to
That's right.
just our mothers and our spouses because everyone else has stopped listening.
That's right.
That's exactly right.
So on today's pod, here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about 2 school shootings in 2 weeks. One right here in Santa Fe, Texas. Other one in Indiana. Then we're going to transition that into Donald Trump's created constitutional crisis that just continues in his assault on the rule of law. We're going to finish the show with the NFL kneeling down to pressure, and they took a knee. So let's just get started. 2 school shootings in 2 weeks, and let's just talk about what happened. Santa Fe, Texas, right here, just not 10 days ago, 10 people killed, 8 students, 2 adults, yet another school shooting. And I've heard a lot of people on the Republican side suggest that that the Trump administration has not faced as many school shootings as the Obama administration, and it always kills me that everything has to be related to what happened to Obama, and we have to be better than Obama. Well, there's been more school shootings since Donald, and I hate this comparison. I have to say it. More school shootings since Donald Trump took office than the entire Obama last year in office. But that's not the point
That's not the point.
at all. At all. It's not the point at all.
It's just part of that yes, but way
right.
of doing business that
Yes,
the
but
Republicans.
mentality.
Yes, and the important thing is, I think that Governor Abbott is trying to show that he
Greg Abbott
is
of Texas.
Greg Abbott is trying to show that he is taking a different tack with this shooting that occurred right here in his backyard, so close to Houston, but by proposing roundtable discussions on the gun matter. But if you look at what has been suggested by Ted Cruz and Abbott and others in the leadership in Texas, limiting doors entrance
That was Lieutenant Governor Dan
and Patrick. And the suggestions that they make about video games causing gun violence, the fact of the matter is that everything that they propose has to do with everything but restrictions on gun ownership.
And how do you have a roundtable discussion? This is what I found amazing, because Greg Abbott, Governor Abbott, who after this shooting, just a couple of weeks before, had gone before the National Rifle Association convention in Dallas and told them that the problem was that not enough people had God in their heart. So it was a God thing, and that's what was causing all this. And then
and was actively auctioning off a gun for his reelection campaign.
yeah, a shotgun, wasn't it? And then so then this happens, and he says, thoughts and prayers aren't enough, but so now we're really going to take action. We're going to have this roundtable discussion. But what's interesting, in that roundtable discussion, no one wanted to talk about any type of gun control. How do you have a roundtable discussion about these shootings without talking about some form of gun control?
In addition to that, Chris and James, they didn't invite any chief of police from a school district. The true first responder to a school shooting is the school district police department. No chief of police from a school district was invited to that roundtable.
Yeah. So, and I think that they needed to be at that round, at the table to discuss this. What really bothers me about these school shootings is how, one, people are now kind of, okay, another school shooting, and they just take a kind of lackadaisical attitude about it. And I think that is something that we have to, I think we're so numb to these things happening that we have to get past that. But number two, I think that our leaders have to step up and really look at this issue in a way that's going to be reasonable to both sides of this issue.
You mean
the Republicans haven't done anything except take the NRA's point of view and say, well, it's not guns that kill people, people kill people, and these guns were legal anyway, which they were. This school did everything right. They did everything right, and they still had a tragedy like this. But my third point is, I'm not seeing a groundswell of kids in Texas emerging to come out on this issue like they did in Florida.
That's absolutely true.
And I think that you're going to have to take the kids getting out front, really articulate and passionate spokespeople like that kid. I forget his
David
last
Hogg.
David
Yeah.
Hogg. So I'm glad you said that, because they had a press conference yesterday, and survivors of the Santa Fe school shooting held a press conference in which they detailed what they believe need to be done to ensure safety in schools and other public places. And the Santa Fe High School junior Megan McGuire told reporters that her goal is to prevent another community from having to endure the same tragedy that they currently are going through. When I say gun safety, I don't mean take away responsible owners' guns, McGuire said. McGuire said that simply she wants to see common sense solutions put into place to keep those who wish to harm themselves or others from obtaining guns. My thought is that if you don't do something, talking to legislators, if you don't do something, you do not have a prayer of being elected, she said. my generation will see to that.
Well, and Everytown USA, I don't know if you all saw the ad, but it was a full page ad in the Houston Chronicle, a letter to Governor Abbott telling him that he has failed by not taking action sooner than this. And I think what's so incredibly frustrating is that we've been having the same discussion dating back to Columbine. And it's not just school shootings, it's any kind of mass
The
shooting.
church shooting.
And,
We had
well,
a church
yeah,
shooting.
we've had horrible ones here in Texas, but we've had them all over the United States. And it doesn't matter where it happens, but it's always going to be horrific. And I think part of the strategy on the part of leaders here and in a lot of other gun-friendly states is just the hope that enough time passes where the conversation will move on and people will forget about it. And so it doesn't maintain the priority that it has right now, or the sense of the urgency that people feel right now. And I don't think the kids in Florida, around the United States, and the March for Our Lives folks are going to let the sense of urgency die.
Let me challenge something there that you just said, that we haven't had this discussion. The problem is the Republicans, every time you have a tragedy like this, say today is not the day to have the discussion. And I've been saying every time we have this, can we have our discussion now?
The idea that children would be afraid to go to school and that the deaths of dozens of kids at universities, in high schools, and Sandy Hook first graders would not move this country to do something about guns.
Well, and I am so glad Chris Tritico brought this up, because I wrote about it in my op-ed a few weeks ago on gun control, in that a lot of this dates back to 1994 when Bill Clinton was in office and we had the assault weapons ban, and the NRA went after all of these members of Congress in Texas and throughout the United States that had supported that assault weapons ban and knocked a tremendous number of them out of office. Jack Brooks had been in Congress for 1 million years, and he got defeated by that fine Representative Steve Stockman.
What happened to him?
He's going to prison soon. But then but anyway, and I think that the Democrats, for lack of a better term, ran for cover. And when I was in Congress,